Welcome back to the IE427 Garage, everybody. Today we've got a bunch of stuff that I want to work on the King's Cobra. I don't know how much of the stuff that I'll be able to include in this one video. However, I've got a clutch cable to install, I've got the fuel tank to go back in, I've got to start looking at a fix for our brakes because our calipers are actually rubbing on the inside of the wheels in the back, and a bunch of other stuff on this car. Let's see how much stuff we can get taken care of. The owner of this car did exactly what he was told. He ordered a stock Ford cable for his Cobra build. The problem is that he ordered an adjustable cable. So on the other end of this cable, down at the transmission, there is an adjustable stud with a threaded nut on the end of it. And if you're going to use that cable, you cannot use a firewall adjuster. Basically what happens is, in order to use a firewall adjuster, you have to take off this bushing. And I'll show you the bushing that's on the other cable that I've got here. But you have to take off that bushing. And so what happens is, this cable ends up being longer. And that length down on the other end means that it's at the end of its threaded length right now. If you look here, our firewall adjuster is nearly at the end of its length. So what this means is, by the time we get this car on the road, there will be no adjustment left in the clutch. Where it is, it's where it's going to have to stay because there's no adjustment left. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this out to the non-adjustable Ford cable. And remember, if you're using an adjustable cable, you cannot use a firewall adjuster. And if you're using a firewall adjuster, you have to use the factory length non-adjustable cable from Ford. And so that's what we're swapping this out to. Now the owner will have a second cable, and what I'll do is I'll put that bushing back on the cable that we have here, the adjustable one. And if something were to happen and he had to swap out the cable, he could just basically take off the firewall adjuster, put the other cable in place, and then adjust it at the transmission, and it'll work just fine. The advantage of having a Ford cable is that the cable itself is Teflon lined. And so it's much easier to engage and disengage the clutch. If you've used the factory 5 supplied, I think it's a Dorman cable, it's hot garbage. I mean, it'll work for maybe the first 1,000 or so miles that you drive the car, but after that it's going to start getting stiff. The other thing that you want to make sure is to make sure you route your cable away from the headers. And you can see how close ours is to the headers right there. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to route it underneath the oil filter and basically go like straight down under the car and then back. And that'll get that cable away from the hot heat from those headers. So this is that bushing I was talking about. So in order to use this with a firewall adjuster, you have to pull this bushing off. And you can see it's pretty thick. It's about an inch, inch and a quarter thick. So think about that. You take that thing off your adjustable cable and you've just lost an inch and a half almost of cable adjustment. And that may be all you're going to get at the bottom to start with. So, like I said, you cannot use that firewall adjuster and the adjustable cable. It doesn't work, or it works for a very small amount of time, because once the clutch breaks in, you're going to see some clutch wear, and you're probably going to have to bring your pedal up a little bit, because in the stock Ford Mustang that these cars kind of were based on as a donor, the actual clutch pedal itself was the adjustment. There were little gears on there, and so as you push the pedal down each time, if you pushed it far enough, it would click into the next gear and it would bring the pedal back up higher. We don't have that here. We have just a standard, clutch cable engagement here. There's no adjustment in here. your only means of adjusting it is going to be here at the firewall, or if you use the adjustable cable, down at the transmission. All right, I took the clutch quadrant off of the car because I think this is a critical step that a lot of people miss. All these pieces that are laser cut by Factory 5 to make up the clutch quadrant are all very sharp. So I'm going to leave the sharp edge out here. It's no big deal. But this is where your clutch cable rides. And so what I've done is I've come in here with a triangular shaped file and I've cleaned up that sharp edge all the way around and down into here. And then I've gone back with the flat file at an angle and I've rounded this over so that now when you run your finger across it, it's not sharp. And that's the problem. That sharp edge just starts digging into the edge of the cable, and then your cable's going to start to fray. And especially if it's that Dorman cable that Factory 5 provides with their kit, what's going to happen is you're going to be driving down the street one day, you're not going to realize that this thing has already started to fray. You're going to go to push the clutch in and it's going to snap. And that's going to be a real bad day. So take some time when you're putting your clutch quadrant together and clean up these sharp edges so that they're not going to harm the cable. All right, I know it's a little dark under here, but you can see where we were on our threads. We only had that much thread left on this adjustable stud. That's not a lot. So, like I said, by replacing this with the stock non-adjustable cable, we're going to make up a lot of that and we'll have all our adjustment at the top. All right, while I'm under here, I figured I might as well show everybody this. So, if you look, there's a tab sticking out. This is a T5, I think it's a T5Z. I don't know what year or if it was ordered brand new. It looks like it's really clean, so I don't know if it's a used one or not. But you can see that tab sticking out of the side of the transmission, and that tab is stuck on the mount for the emergency brake. It's not supposed to be like that. So what we're going to have to do back here, little sidetrack, we're going to have to loosen the rear trans mount. We're going to have to raise the back of the transmission up, and then we're going to have to cut that tab off so that the transmission finally rests down where it's supposed to, because right now I know if I loosen those bolts for the transmission mount, this thing's going to like spring up. So we're going to go ahead and do that while we're underneath the car. That's why I said I don't know where this video is going to go. It's kind of going to go wherever the car takes us at this point. And I've got a stock Ford Mustang handle that we're going to swap out for this Factory 5 piece. Yeah. So I don't know how I'm going to get that out because I just noticed that the bolts go in from the wrong side. So wish me luck. All right. I'm done down here as far as the clutch goes. I'm a little bit worried about the play in the clutch because it looks like the clutch arm is way forward. I guess I'm just going to have to see what happens. I may get up there with my inspection mirror and make sure that the throwout bearing is in the fork the right way. But I seem to remember that the T5s, the clutch arm is much farther back when it's kind of at rest right now. There's only about, maybe 1.5 inches that clutch fork can go forward without bottoming out. I'm gonna have to see how much clutch cable we have up on top as well. All right, we're still, we've got adjustment, but we're still at this much of our adjuster. Now, I've pressed on the clutch with my arm, and this is the wonderful thing about this Ford cable, is I can push it with my hand. So I'm pushing that clutch in and engage it with my hand. You try that with the factory supplied cable from Factory 5, and you're not going to be able to do that. One last thing. When you're adjusting your cable for free play, you want to have some. You don't want this to be jammed up against your stop all the time. So you should be able to have about 1 inch of free play at the bottom of the pedal. So you can see I've got about 1 inch of free play before I start pushing against the throwout bearing. If you put it any tighter than that, you'll be riding against the throwout bearing all the time. You're going to burn out a throwout bearing. So make sure you keep a little bit of free play. The stock Ford clutch cable and the stock Ford clutch quadrant are kind of designed to do that in their stock form when they're self-adjusting. So anytime you change that mechanism, easy for me to say, anytime, I'm going to get it out yet. Anytime you change out that mechanism to something that is completely mechanical and non-adjustable, just remember that you got to keep a little bit of free play because you don't want to roast your clutch. All right, I had to edit all of the content that I shot yesterday because former President Trump was shot, and I was having a hard time getting through a lot of the filming that I was doing for this video. And so what I did is I just deleted all that content. It's basically what you guys are going to see here, but I'm in a different frame of mind now, and I think I'll have a much easier time getting through this than I was having yesterday, trying to go around the car and show you guys all the stuff that I'd done on Sunday. I posted on Facebook on Saturday. No, I didn't post anything on Facebook on Saturday. I posted on Sunday. I think I posted Sunday evening, basically saying out of respect for everyone who had been affected by that tragic shooting, that we kept from posting anything on Saturday. The country was having a hard enough time dealing with what had happened, and I didn't really need the attention. I get enough attention. We're going to go through everything that I had previously filmed and do it with fresh eyes and a fresh perspective. So back here at the rear of the car, we've got the gas tank back in place. I've got to do a little bit of fine tuning. I'm not real happy with the way the car accepted the fuel tank, and something that struck me as a little bit odd is this is actually a Ford fuel tank from Breeze Automotive. So it has a Ford part number on it. It's not the more generic one that Factory 5 uses. And what kind of caught me off guard is there's no pre-drilled hole for the fuel tank filler neck and the strap that goes on there to support it. And in every other Ford fuel tank that I've ever come across, it has that pre-punched hole for the mounting strap. This one does not have that. So I'm going to have to drill that, and I'm going to have to be really careful not to interfere with that seam weld that goes around the entire perimeter of the tank. But the tank is in. We've got all of the lines hooked up. The one line left to hook up is going to be the charcoal canister, but the charcoal canister is going to go right about where I've got those wires kind of strapped up to the side of the car now. So we'll pull those loose and we'll get that charcoal canister installed there. I do have to make a bracket for the charcoal canister because when you order the base kit from Factory 5, it doesn't come with that cool little bracket that they ship with the charcoal canister. We bought our charcoal canister from Rock Auto, and so it doesn't come with a mount. So I'll fabricate something up and we'll mount that all up. So the fuel tank is done. While we've got the car up in the air, I wanted to show everybody what I was talking about as far as the tab on the transmission. So right up here, there's a tab that's kind of sticking out from the side of the transmission, and I think you can see it. Let me see if I can get the camera up in there. You can see right there, right next to the head of that bolt, you can see where I cut that off. I managed to get my Sawzall up in there, or recip saw for those of you that get upset when we use the Sawzall proper name. But I went up in there and I cut that tab off, and now the transmission is sitting down where it's supposed to be. So it's not, get this out of here, it's not stretching the mount. Basically right here, the mount was being pulled down because the tab was holding up the right side of the engine and the transmission, and the polyurethane was being stretched in order to like keep it all in place. I also found that the bolts going into the transmission mount are not long enough. Once you start adding parts to the bottom, like this one has the drive shaft loop bracket mounted here. So now that hardware has to be replaced. It needs to be longer because it doesn't have enough thread engagement in it. So we're going to replace those bolts that went in there with longer bolts, and then that part will be done. I managed to get one of the bolts out for our e-brake handle. That whole e-brake assembly from Factory 5 is coming out, and we're replacing it with a donor handle and donor cables because honestly, they just simply work better. But while I was under here, I saw some other things that I'm going to need to address. I'm going to make that hole right there for the engine ground. I'm going to make that bigger, and I'm going to weld a stud there. So we're going to have a welded stud that both the engine ground, the battery ground, and the chassis ground can all be bonded to, so that we're not relying on just some threads right there going into the chassis like the Breeze kit instructs you to do. We're going to have an actual welded connection to the chassis, which I believe is much more conductive. So what I've been doing is I've been kind of jumping around the car because we've got a bunch of stuff in a bunch of different places around the car. One of the things that we're trying to do is get this car ready for first start. And so I'm trying to get the cooling system taken care of. I've got a cooling fan on order along with a higher amperage relay and some other stuff. We're going to put the Ford OEM style fan in this thing so it just flows. The Factory 5 supplied fan is okay, but it's nowhere big enough for the size that this radiator is. So when you start reducing the airflow through it with a shroud, it kind of limits its cooling capacity when you're driving. It's okay when you're in stop and go traffic if the fan can move enough air flow through the radiator. But when you're driving, you want as much flow through that radiator as you can. And so we're going to really open up that area that the radiator has to cool when you're driving, because our fan is going to be a lot bigger. And the shroud itself, although it's a very effective shroud, actually blocks less air when the car is driving. So we're going to take care of that as soon as that stuff arrives. But in preparation for that, what I did do is I removed what was a rubber cap on this outlet or inlet, because it's actually pulling water in to the water pump. I removed that rubber cap, and we've replaced it with a rubber bypass hose. And what I've done over here on the top of the intake manifold is I put a T. So the T has male threads that go into the intake manifold, and then we've got our temperature sensor for our gauge on top of there for the speed hut gauge, and then we've got an outlet on the front for that bypass. Now, you can do this T in a couple of different sizes. Because of the intake manifold, I used the 1/2-inch NPT size here and chose to go with a reducer in the top. But if your intake manifold has a 3/8 outlet in the top, a 3/8 NPT, you can use a 3/8 T. Now the T will be a female, male, male. No, it'll be a male, female, female, just like this one. And then you're going to need a threaded outlet out of the front of it. So this is a 1/2-inch by 5/8 barbed fitting so that it attaches to our hose. But there's a number of different kind of brass solutions for this. If we weren't putting our gauge in there, let's say the thermostat housing had a threaded inlet, we could put the temperature sensor there. The problem with that is that it would only sense temperature when the thermostat was open. And so I want a more true reading here from the cool side of the intake manifold. So just for reference, the driver's side is the hot side. The passenger side is the cool side. So all of the coolant comes in on the driver's side. All of the coolant goes out to return to the radiator on the passenger side. So what I've done is I've put the temperature sensor for the gauge on this side because it's the cooler side of the engine. So you'll get a reading of the actual temperature of the coolant as it goes back to the radiator. And over on the other side of the intake manifold, I'm going to put the sensor for the cooling fan because that's the hot side. I want the cooling fan to come on when the radiator is getting basically to the temperature we want the cooling fan to come on at. And so if I were to put it over on this side, on the passenger side, it would take longer for that fan to turn on, basically. So we're going to put the other sensor on that side. That's going to be the one that turns the cooling fan on and off through our relay. And then the cooling portion, other than the fan, will be done. I did get the breeze clamps on our hose from the video a couple of weeks ago. And you know, it's funny. You know, there's always someone smarter than you on the internet. And so, you know, you bring up, you know, it's a breeze clamp. And they want to argue with you. Well, sorry, I've got one box breeze clamp, 2 box breeze clamp, 3 box breeze clamp, 4 box breeze clamp. And I mentioned that, you know, Breeze is one of probably the oldest manufacturer of these style clamps, and these are made in the USA. I pay a little bit extra money, but these are good quality clamps, and I've never had a lick of problem with them. They do not strip out like some of the offshore ones that you're going to find at you know, the auto parts store. Now Napa, you can still find good American-made hose clamps at Napa, and I think it's under their own brand, and who knows, Breeze may make them. But so yeah, it's indeed Breeze clamp, and they've been making these, God, since before I was a kid. So I can remember even my grandfather, you know, my grandfather Frank, you know, calling them Breeze clamps. That's what they're called. The name just kind of stuck, just like Sawzall. So when you get out your recip saw, even has a Makita name on it, you know, you're still going to call it a Sawzall because it does Sawzall things. So yeah, the Breeze clamps, they're a great product, and so that's why we use them. And I get those at our local kind of specialty hardware store because that hardware store has everything. And that's where I get all the hardware for the turn signals that I send you guys too. All that hardware is American made too. So I think I'm probably going to end the video here. I don't know how long it's going, but this week has been exhausting. And I mentioned on my personal Facebook page that I honestly couldn't wait for the weekend to be over. I just wanted the weekend to be over and to be able to go back to work and not think about everything that had happened over the weekend. But, you know, these are the days we live in. So if you're enjoying the content, and I hope you are, please do the like, the share, the subscribe, all that kind of stuff. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.